A story of karma, revenge, and the gods who watch. There is a saying among the Norse people that has survived 1,000 winters. The wolf you feed will love you. The wolf you betray will find you. This is not a story about heroes. It is not a story about gods. It is a story about 3 men, 1 woman, and the slow grinding weight of what happens when iron crosses iron. And the universe remembers every strike. It begins, as most Viking stories do, with blood. But not the blood of battle. It begins with the blood of a brother. The year is 872. In the northern reaches of Norway, where the fjords cut so deep into the earth that the mountains look like giants kneeling to drink, there was a small but powerful settlement called Jarnvik, Iron Cove. It was not the largest settlement in the north, but it had something the large settlements did not. It had Bjorn Halvorsen. Bjorn was the kind of man that the skald struggled to describe, because the words for his qualities did not fit neatly together. He was enormous, nearly 2 heads taller than most men, with hands that could crush an axe handle through grip alone. But he laughed easily, and often. He gave the last of his food to the children of dead warriors without being asked. He wept openly when a good dog died. The men of Jarnvik would have followed him into hell itself. His brother, Leif Halvorsen, was different. Where Bjorn was granite, Leif was smoke, always shifting, always present, always dangerous in ways that were hard to see. He was slender, with clever eyes and a mouth that moved faster than his mind, which was itself faster than most men's swords. He was charming, deeply, effortlessly charming. The difference between the brothers was this: Bjorn made men trust him because he was trustworthy. Leif made men trust him because he was very good at making men trust him. Their father, Wyrd, had died 3 winters prior, taken by a fever that no herb woman could break. He had left the Jarnvik longhouse and the title of Jarl to Bjorn, the eldest by 2 years. Leif had smiled at the funeral. Everyone assumed it was grief wearing a strange mask. It was not grief. Her name was Sigrid Eriksdoda, and she had arrived in Jarnvik 2 summers ago as part of a trade agreement between her father's settlement in the east and the Iron Cove. She was not what the men of Jarnvik had expected. They had expected a soft woman, sent to soften an alliance. What they got was a woman who could read runes better than the local vulva, who argued trade terms with the sharpness of a blade, and who had once, according to the Eastern traders, broken a man's nose with a clay cup when he had grabbed her arm without permission. The men of Jarnvik decided they liked her enormously. Bjorn fell in love with her in the way that large, quiet men often fall, completely, helplessly, and with no map for how to navigate it. He began leaving the best pieces of dried elk outside her sleeping quarters. He carved small wooden wolves, which he left on her windowsill, then pretended he had not. He once spent 3 days learning a specific rune poem because she had mentioned, once, that it was her favorite. Sigrid noticed all of this. Sigrid was not a woman who missed things. She found it deeply endearing. She also found Bjorn himself, his honesty, his heaviness, his warmth, to be the rarest thing she had encountered in a world full of men who wore their faces like armor. By the winter of that year, she and Bjorn were inseparable. Leif watched this from across every room they entered together. His expression never changed, but something behind his eyes did. Leif had wanted Sigrid from the moment he had seen her. This was not love. To be precise about it, Leif was not entirely capable of love in the way Bjorn was. What Leif experienced was something closer to wanting to possess the things that other people treasured. The way a crow is drawn to bright objects not because it understands beauty, but because brightness signals value. Sigrid was the brightest thing in Jarnvik. Bjorn had her. Therefore, Leif wanted her. But there was something else, something deeper and uglier than desire. Leif wanted the title that Bjorn carried. He wanted the longhouse. He wanted the men who followed his brother with devotion that bordered on worship. He had wanted these things since childhood, since the day his father had placed a hand on Bjorn's shoulder and said, quietly but within earshot, "This one will be Jarl." Leif had stood 3 feet away. His father had not looked at him. He had been waiting for 10 years for the right opportunity. That winter, watching Bjorn and Sigrid sit together by the fire, Bjorn's massive hand covering hers, both of them laughing at something only they could hear, Leif decided that the right opportunity would have to be created. The opportunity arrived on its own, wearing the face of a man called Gunnar. Gunnar Eriksson, known as Iron Teeth because of the iron cap he had fitted over a broken front tooth, which had never been removed, arrived in Jarnvik with 30 warriors and a proposition. He was a raider from the Western Islands, brutal and efficient, with a reputation for burning what he could not buy. He had heard that Jarnvik sat at the mouth of a river that ran deep into rich farmland, and he wanted to use that river. Not buy access to it. Use it. He came to Bjorn with the kind of offer that is not really an offer. Pay tribute or be burned. Bjorn listened to every word Gunnar said. He offered Gunnar food and mead. He asked intelligent questions. And when Gunnar finished speaking, Bjorn looked at him with calm, dark eyes and said, "I will give you my answer in the morning." What Bjorn did not know was that Leif had already spoken to Gunnar 3 days before Gunnar's arrival, in secret. The offer Leif had made was simple and terrible. "Help me remove my brother. Take whatever you want from the river out. The title and the longhouse will be mine, and you will have a friend in Jarnvik rather than an enemy." Gunnar had agreed. Gunnar liked simple and terrible arrangements. The betrayal was elegant in the way that only the most cowardly betrayals are elegant. It did not happen with a sword. It happened with a word. The night of Gunnar's arrival, while the settlement slept, Leif went to Bjorn's sleeping quarters. He woke him softly. He told him, with great apparent urgency, that he had heard Gunnar's men planning to attack in the morning, before Bjorn could give his answer, and that Bjorn should take 3 men and ride to the eastern pass to confirm whether Gunnar had more warriors hidden there. Bjorn trusted his brother completely. He took 3 men and rode east before dawn. What happened next? Leif had arranged with Gunnar's best fighter, a man called Eric Blackhand, who was waiting in the eastern pass with 6 warriors. Bjorn and his 3 men rode straight into them. It was not a fair fight. 6 against 4, with surprise on their side. 2 of Bjorn's men died in the first minute. A third was taken prisoner. Bjorn fought like something that had escaped from the old stories. He killed 3 of Gunnar's men before an axe caught him across the back of the left knee, dropping him. He did not die. This was not part of Leif's plan. Eric Blackhand, looking at the enormous, bleeding man who had just killed 3 of his warriors with a bad leg, made a practical decision. He tied Bjorn to a tree, took his weapons, and rode back to report. Leif, when told that Bjorn was alive, said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, "Leave him. The wolves will finish it by morning." And then he went to sleep. Sigrid had not slept that night. She had seen Leif enter Bjorn's quarters. She had seen Bjorn ride out with 3 men before dawn. She did not yet know what this meant, but she knew, with the particular certainty that lives in the chest rather than the mind, that something had been broken. When morning came, and Bjorn had not returned, she went to Leif. He told her that Bjorn had ridden east to check on a report of raiders, and had not come back, which surely meant the worst had happened. His voice was careful and sad. His eyes were neither. Sigrid looked at him for a long time. She said nothing. She went back to her quarters and sat very still for an hour. Then she put on her warmest cloak, took a knife from under her sleeping mat, and walked east. She found Bjorn 6 hours later, still alive, still tied to the tree, surrounded by the bodies of 3 dead wolves who had apparently misjudged what a wounded Bjorn Halvorsen was capable of. He was pale from blood loss and half delirious, but when he saw her, he laughed, the same easy laugh, even then. "I thought it might be you," he said. She cut the ropes. She dressed the wound with strips of her cloak. She helped him walk, slowly, back into the forest, away from Jarnvik, because she had thought ahead enough to understand that going back was not yet possible. On the walk, he told her everything Leif had said to him that night. She told him everything she had seen. There was a long silence in the forest as the pieces fell together. Then Bjorn said, in a very quiet voice, "My own brother." And Sigrid, who did not believe in softening truth, yes. Back in Jarnvik, Leif moved with the efficiency of a man who had been planning this for a very long time. He told the settlement that Bjorn had ridden east and been killed by Gunnar's hidden forces, that it was a tragedy, and also a lesson about the cost of negotiating with raiders rather than striking first. The settlement mourned, genuinely and deeply mourned. Leif allowed this for 2 days. Then he announced a new arrangement with Gunnar, a partnership, not a tribute agreement. He framed it as strength, as pragmatism, as the smart move. Most of the men accepted it because grief had made them tired, and Leif was persuasive, and the alternative seemed to be war with Gunnar's forces. 3 of the older warriors, men who had served under Bjorn's father, did not accept it. Leif had them removed from the settlement within the week. He called it exile for spreading false rumors. They were simply gone one morning, escorted east by Gunnar's men. What happened to them in the eastern forest, no one in Jarnvik ever confirmed. Leif then did something unexpected. He was good at being Jarl. He was organized. He was efficient. He allocated resources well. He maintained the trade routes. Under his leadership, Jarnvik did not collapse. It functioned and even grew. This was, in some ways, the worst part, because it meant people stopped asking questions. He also, within 2 months of Bjorn's disappearance, began spending considerable time with Astrid, the young widow of one of the traders, a woman chosen, Sigrid would later understand, specifically because she was the opposite of Sigrid in every way that mattered. Soft where Sigrid was sharp, obedient where Sigrid was independent, easy to manage. Leif needed someone he could manage. He was, for the first time in his life, content. The gods, when they hear that word from a man like Leif, tend to pay very close attention. For 3 years, Bjorn and Sigrid lived in the forest settlements to the east. They were not alone. The eastern forest was full of people who had been pushed out of their homes by raiders and political violence. Small groups of survivors who had organized into something that was not quite a settlement and not quite a war band, but something in between. The man who led them was called Orm, Old Orm, though he was perhaps 50, which was ancient by the standards of the time. He had been a Jarl once, far to the north, until a rival had burned his hall and killed his sons. He had walked south for a year and built something here in the dark woods, piece by piece, out of nothing but iron will and the loyalty of the broken. Orm looked at Bjorn when he arrived, bleeding, limping, enormous, and said, "Can you still fight?" Bjorn said, "Give me a week." Orm gave him a week. At the end of the week, Bjorn had trained 8 of Orm's men to fight in a way they had never fought before. A shield wall formation he had spent years developing, tight and mobile, designed for the narrow passes of fjord country. Orm said, "You can stay." It was not a long speech. Orm was not a man for long speeches. Sigrid, meanwhile, did what Sigrid did in every situation. She became essential. She organized the settlement's trade with nearby farms. She cataloged their resources. She learned the surrounding forest in a way that most of the warriors never bothered to, which meant she became their best scout. Not because she was faster, but because she actually paid attention. And during the long winters, she and Bjorn talked. For hours, for days, about everything. This was something Bjorn had never had with anyone. Someone who would sit and think alongside him, who would push back when he was wrong, who would be honest about hard things without cruelty. He had loved her before. In the forest, he understood her. And she, who had always kept a careful distance from everyone, found herself letting the distance close. By the second winter, they were together in the way that people are when they have chosen each other with full knowledge of the cost. By the third winter, they were planning. Information, in 872, traveled at the speed of horses and ravens in the mouths of traveling traders. What reached Bjorn and Sigrid in the eastern forest, carried by a trader who owed Sigrid a favor from her pre-Jarnvik days, was this. Gunnar Iron Teeth was growing impatient with Leif. The arrangement between them had been profitable at first, but Gunnar was a raider, not a partner. He did not think in terms of long-term agreements, and the river access he had been promised was generating less wealth than he had imagined. He had begun demanding more. Leif had begun finding reasons to delay. More importantly, Gunnar had recently raided a settlement to the south that had been under the protection of a powerful Jarl named Thorvald the Old, a man with 200 warriors and the patience of a glacier. Thorvald was angry. Thorvald was coming north. The threat of Thorvald was making Gunnar nervous. Nervous men make bad decisions. This was the information Bjorn and Sigrid needed. Sigrid laid it out on the table of their small house like pieces of a puzzle. She moved them around for an hour while Bjorn watched. Then she looked up and said, "Gunnar is going to turn on Leif. It's only a question of when." Bjorn said, "Then we help it happen faster." Sigrid said, "We need more men." Bjorn looked at Orm, who was sitting in the corner, eating dried fish, pretending not to listen. Orm said, without looking up, "I have 62. Bjorn said, "Is that enough?" Orm finally looked up. He had the kind of eyes that had seen so much that they had stopped showing surprise. "For what you're thinking? Possibly. But we'll need something else." "What?" said Bjorn. "We'll need Gunnar to be the one who starts it. If you march in and attack Leif, some of those men in Jarnvik will fight for their Jarl out of loyalty, even a Jarl they don't entirely trust. But if Gunnar turns on Leif first, and Leif's men are already fighting and bleeding and losing, then you arrive, then they don't fight for Leif. They fight alongside you." There was a silence. Sigrid was already smiling. She had been thinking the same thing. Before we move forward, because what comes next changes everything, I want to take a moment. If you've made it this far into Bjorn and Sigrid's story, you already know what this channel is about. Cold Reckoning is where history's most powerful karma stories live. Viking betrayals, medieval revenge, warriors who were ridden off and came back for everything. Every week, a new story. Every story, a reckoning. If this is the kind of storytelling that keeps you up at night, hit subscribe and the bell notification, and you'll never miss the moment the wolf comes back. Now, back to the fjord, because Gunnar Iron Teeth is about to make the worst mistake of his life. Sigrid wrote the letter herself. She wrote it on a piece of cured leather, in Gunnar's rough dialect, with the deliberate spelling errors of a man who was powerful, but not educated. She had studied 3 actual letters from Gunnar, intercepted by Orm's network over the years, to get the voice exactly right. The letter appeared to be from a Western trader, addressed to Jarl Thorvald the Old. It described, in careful detail, Gunnar's raid on the southern settlement. It included the names of 3 men who had participated. It included details about where Gunnar stored his ships. None of this information was false. That was important. A good trap is built from true things. The letter was delivered to Thorvald by a trader who was paid very well and told only that it was a message from someone who wanted justice. Thorvald read it. Then, he sent 30 riders north toward Gunnar's territory. This was not quite what Bjorn and Sigrid had planned. They had hoped for a slower build, more time to position. But when Orm's scouts reported riders moving north, they adapted. When Gunnar heard that Thorvald's men were coming, he did what frightened men with resources tend to do. He burned the evidence and moved the problem. The problem, in his estimation, was Leif. Leif was the one who had convinced him to take the river route, which had led to the southern raid, which had angered Thorvald. Leif had made him promises that had not materialized, and now Gunnar needed a location, a place to store warriors and ships that Thorvald didn't know about. He needed Jarnvik, not as a partner, as a base. He arrived with 40 warriors and told Leif, politely, with iron beneath the politeness, that Jarnvik would now be housing his fleet. Leif, who had not survived this long by being stupid, understood immediately what this was. He asked for 3 days to prepare the settlement. Gunnar gave him 2. In those 2 days, Leif did something that surprised even himself. He sent a secret message east, looking for allies. He didn't know Bjorn was in the east. He was looking for any Jarl with men to spare. The message was intercepted by Orm's scouts before it reached anyone. Sigrid read it, and then read it again. She handed it to Bjorn and said, "Your brother is terrified." Bjorn said, "Good." Then, after not good enough. We move in 4 days. They came at dawn from the north. 63 warriors, Orm's 62, and Bjorn, who walked in front because no one had suggested he do otherwise, emerging from the tree line as the morning mist sat low over the fjord. Inside Jarnvik, Gunnar's 40 warriors were already awake. The 2 days had become a standoff. Leif's men and Gunnar's men sleeping in the same longhouse, weapons within reach, nobody entirely comfortable. When Bjorn's force appeared at the northern edge of the settlement, the first reaction from both groups was the same: confusion. And then one of Leif's older warriors, a man called Hrafn, who had served under Bjorn's father and had always had better eyes than everyone else, stood up and said, in a voice that cut across the noise, "That's Bjorn." 3 seconds of absolute silence. Then Gunnar, who was not a complicated man, made the only decision he knew how to make. He drew his sword. The battle that followed lasted approximately 40 minutes. It was fought on 3 levels: Gunnar's men against Bjorn's approaching force, Leif's men, caught in the middle, choosing sides in real time, and a private, vicious fight in the longhouse between Gunnar himself and Bjorn, which was less a battle than a geological event. Gunnar was a skilled fighter, quick, aggressive, experienced. He opened the longhouse door and charged Bjorn before Bjorn was fully through the entrance, trying to use the doorframe to limit Bjorn's range. This was the right tactical choice. It failed because Bjorn simply took the doorframe with him. The wall around the door came through with Bjorn when Gunnar shoved, because Bjorn's solution to the problem of the doorframe was to remove it by hitting it with his shoulder, and then they were in the open. And Gunnar's tactical advantage was the open air, and Bjorn's advantage in the open air was that he was Bjorn. Gunnar Iron Teeth fought hard. He left 3 cuts on Bjorn's arms and 1 across his cheek. But he had been fighting all morning, and Bjorn had been waiting 3 years, and there is a difference between those 2 things. When it was over, Bjorn stood in the center of the settlement holding Gunnar's iron-capped tooth, which had come loose in the final exchange, and looked around at the men of Jarnvik. They were looking back at him. Hrafn, the old warrior who had recognized him, slowly put down his sword and kneeled. One by one, the others followed. Leif had not fought. When the battle began, he had made his way to the back of the longhouse, through a small door that he had always known was there, because Leif always knew the exits. He had been running south along the fjord shore when Sigrid stepped out of the trees in front of him. She was alone. She was holding nothing. He stopped. He was breathing hard. His face, for the first time in Sigrid's memory, showed something real. And what it showed was fear. He said, "Where is Bjorn?" She said, "Behind you." He turned. Bjorn was 20 feet away, walking slowly. His arms were bleeding. His face was calm. Leif looked between them. His hands moved toward the knife at his belt. Bjorn said, "Don't." Not a threat, a request. Something in the voice stopped Leif's hands. There was a long silence. The sounds of the settlement were distant. The fjord was very blue. Leif said, finally, "Are you going to kill me?" Bjorn looked at him for a long time. "No," he said. Leif blinked. "You're going to leave," Bjorn said. "You're going to walk south, and you're going to keep walking. You don't come back. You don't send men. You don't send messages. You take the name Halvorsen, and you bury it somewhere no one will find it. If I hear the name again from anyone who has seen your face, I will find you." Leif said, "That's it?" Bjorn said, "That is the mercy our father would have wanted me to show you. I don't believe you deserve it, but I'm doing it for him." Something moved across Leif's face. That might have been grief or shame, or something that had not fully formed into either. His eyes went to Sigrid. She looked back without expression. He turned and walked south. Neither of them watched him go. The restoration of Bjorn as Jarl of Jarnvik was not a ceremony. He simply walked back into the lawn house, sat in the chair at the head of the table and said, "Who needs food?" It was very Bjorn. Within a week, Old Orm's eastern settlement was formally allied with Jarnvik. A partnership, not an absorption. Orm kept his own leadership, his own name. But the two settlements operated as one, which made them collectively more powerful than either of Gunnar's remaining raiding groups. Thorvald the Old, when he arrived in the north looking for Gunnar, and found instead a settled Jarnvik with its new jarl and a document acknowledging the southern raid, decided that the situation was satisfactorily resolved. He accepted 2 ships from Gunnar's abandoned fleet as tribute and turned south again. The river route remained open, for trade this time, not for raiders. Bjorn negotiated 3 new trading agreements in the first month of his restoration. Hafren, the warrior who had first recognized him, became his most trusted advisor. He was not young, and he was not fast anymore, and he could not fight the way he once had. But he had spent 3 years watching Leif run Jarnvik, and he knew exactly which decisions had been made in bad faith, and why, and this made him invaluable. Sigrid, in the spring after the battle, walked to the highest point above Jarnvik, a flat-topped cliff that looked out over the fjord and, on clear days, all the way to the sea. She stood there for a long time. Then she came back down and told Bjorn that she wanted to formalize their arrangement, not because she felt she had to, but because she had made her choice 3 years ago in the eastern forest, and she wanted the settlement to know it too. The ceremony was simple, because they were both simple about important things. Hrafn performed it. Orm attended, which was the closest he ever came to emotional expression. Several of the older women of the settlement wept, which surprised everyone, including the women. Bjorn gave Sigrid a carved wooden wolf, the same kind he had left on a windowsill years ago. She still had the first one. She had carried it through 3 years of exile in her cloak pocket. She had never told him. She told him now. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I didn't know if you knew that was me." She said, "I always knew it was you." 3 years after his exile, a trader arrived in Jarnvik from the south with news. He had heard in a settlement 2 weeks south about a man who had arrived the previous winter. Clever, smooth-tongued, good at trade. He had made himself useful. He had made himself trusted. He had eventually maneuvered himself into a position of some authority within the settlement's trading operation. And then, the previous autumn, a discrepancy had been discovered in the accounts. The man had left in the night before anyone could confront him. The settlement was called Sandvik. The man had given his name as Leif. No family name. Bjorn listened to this without expression. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "He'll do it again." The trader agreed that this seemed likely. Bjorn looked out the longhouse door, at the fjord, at the water he had grown up beside. He said nothing more about Leif. He never mentioned him again. But in the old Norse understanding of karma, the concept they called Wyrd, the web of fate that each person weaves through their choices, there is a principle that the skalds return to again and again. You cannot escape what you are. You can walk south for 3 years. You can change your name. You can start over and over and over. But you bring yourself with you every time. And the web remembers every thread. 10 years after the Battle of Jarnvik, a skald came through the settlement and asked Bjorn if he could write the story down. Bjorn thought about this for a while, then said, "Write it as it happened. All of it, including the parts where I was afraid." The skald asked, "What should I call it?" Sigrid, who was sitting across the room reading something, did not look up. She said, "The price of iron and blood." The skald wrote it down. The story spread north and east and west, the way good stories do, carried in the mouths of traders and sailors and the women who sat by fires in the long dark winters. People told it differently in different places. Some versions made Bjorn larger. Some versions made Leif more monstrous. Some versions gave Sigrid a sword fight that never happened. But the core of it stayed the same, because the core of it was simple. A man who chose betrayal over patience. A man who chose loyalty over anger. A woman who chose truth over comfort. And the slow, patient, inevitable weight of what each of those choices cost. Odin watches. The ravens remember. The web holds every thread. And when the reckoning comes, and it always comes, it comes not as lightning, but as tide, quiet, inevitable, complete. This has been Cold Reckoning. If Bjorn and Sigrid's story stayed with you, if the patience of Wyrd felt like something you've seen in your own life, share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And if you're new here, this is what we do. History's most powerful karma stories told the way they deserve to be told. Subscribe, and every week, a new reckoning finds you. The wolf always comes back.